Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Segreto, and so honored to be with you again this evening as your moderator for our In the Know virtual town hall. Now, these town halls are an opportunity for all of us to share with you how UHealth, the University of Miami Health System, and the Miller School of Medicine are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the only academic medical center in South Florida, we're excited to share our expertise in research and patient care with all of you tonight. In fact, we will continue doing these town halls for the next few months to keep you up to date. Now, this evening, we're going to look at how to protect not just your physical well-being, but our mental health as well. This global pandemic, as you all know, has brought so much change to our lives. Our daily schedules and interactions and how we work and socialize, social distancing or physical distancing, as President Frank likes to refer to it, has meant so much more to us because it's meant that we're at home more with our spouses, with our children, with our families, and new and unfamiliar routines are happening as well. Every single day seems to change while it's still quite normal. Many of our parents have been thrust into the roles of teachers in addition to your own work and home responsibilities. It can be stressful and unsettling, but there are ways to cope with the chaos and the anxiety that COVID-19 has brought to our lives. Tonight, you will hear from several UHealth experts about the best ways to do just that, how to balance everything that's happening in your home to address fears of the unknown, and how to help your children cope with these really unusual times. But before we get started, let's go over how you can participate in tonight's conversation. Now, once our leaders finish their addresses, they will answer questions that you've submitted over the last few days. But you will also have the opportunity tonight to submit questions during this program. Please use the Q&A feature. You see it right down there at the bottom of your screen to send your questions. And we promise we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. And those that we don't get to, we will answer those in a written Q&A, which we will post online, along with a full recording of this program and resources as well that can help if you or someone you know or someone you love is struggling. We will send you an email with the link in the coming days. But now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Barbara Coffey, who is professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the chief of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Dr. Coffey, welcome.
Thank you, Tony. It is my pleasure to be here this evening. I want to start by recognizing so many of the people in our health system who have been instrumental in making sure that we continue to serve our patients and the community. We are committed to making sure that we can offer all of the services that you're used to receiving from UHealth. We've been extraordinarily busy because the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all of our lives. We now live in a state of constant vigilance as we navigate new norms. The challenges of social distancing, home confinement, healthcare concerns, and financial instability, all of which will have profound effects on our mental health. We are responsible for the health and well-being of our children too, and helping them navigate difficult new rules and regulations in their lives. Many of them are struggling with the loss of normalcy, such as the comfort of being in a classroom among their friends, and lost milestones, such as birthdays and graduations. They hear you, their parents, at times talk about unsettling topics such as illness and death. Now, as the world looks to start slowly reopening, we face uncertainty there as well. For example, is it safe? Do I have to wear a mask or gloves when I go into a business? How do I cope with all of this fear and uncertainty? These are valid worries, and we know many people are having a difficult time managing the stress and anxiety of such an unprecedented time. But there are ways to cope, and tonight I look forward to discussing the ways in which we can help you and help ourselves. Thank you.
Dr. Coffey, thank you so much. Now, before we continue, again, I want to remind everyone that you could submit questions through the Q&A feature. You see that at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to them shortly. But now let's talk about the role that integrative and complementary medicine can have in staying healthy. I would like to introduce Dr. Karen Koffler, who is the medical director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine at the Miller School of Medicine and an integrative functional medicine practitioner. Dr. Koffler.
Thank you, Tony. So welcome to everyone that has tuned in this evening. I feel that this virus, now more than ever, is an opportunity for us to really become our own best health advocates. What we see in terms of who tends to be most affected by serious illness tells us that by addressing our lifestyle, we can really shore up our health and protect us should we get exposed so that we have only a mild illness. A healthy immune system is created by how we eat, how we sleep, how we move, and can be augmented by specific supplements. And really, it's the goal of the Osher Center to address everyone's health, mind, body, spirit in totality, so that we can help people achieve their most optimal state of being. Our center will be offering a full range of therapies, including massage therapy, acupuncture and Chinese medicine, nutrition, health coaching, and more, because we believe that all of those aspects contribute to a person's well-being. And I too look forward to answering your questions this evening.
Dr. Koffler, thank you so much. Now let's turn our attention to the questions submitted by some of you. Joining us this evening to help answer your questions is Dr. Radu Savanau, professor and executive vice chair in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Services. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Savanau. But let's go to our first question. And our first question is for you, Dr. Coffey. Can you tell us what effect social distancing and quarantining have on people's mental health and well-being?
Yes, thank you, Tony. That's a very important question. I also agree with Dr. Frank that we should call it physical distancing, because socially we're staying connected in the ways that we have remotely. There can be many different effects of this experience, depending on who it is that we're talking about, ranging from anxiety to sadness to full depression, particularly in those who might be vulnerable. I would like to emphasize the importance of connection and keeping those connections going for everyone, with friends and family and colleagues.
Thank you so much. Our next question for Dr. Koffler: how does stress affect our bodies, and how does it make us more susceptible to COVID-19 from a functional medicine perspective?
So one of the things that I see in my practice, I think is fairly ubiquitous, is that stressed people tend to eat poorly, tend to have their sleep disrupted, tend to not exercise, and they tend to not follow through on those practices that actually create greater resilience against stress. I think that's a fairly universal phenomena that I end up seeing. Stress upsets our microbiome, it upsets our digestive function, it alters our hormonal communication, it makes us less creative, less grateful. It really undermines our own ability to think through our situation, let alone what happens at the cellular level, where we're not delivering enough oxygen or nutrients, we're not carting away waste. Our immune system is less functional and less appropriately communicative. So really every system is affected by stress.
Dr. Koffler, thank you. Dr. Savanau, our first responders are dealing with unique circumstances here. Some are staying away from their families, in fact, to keep them protected. Others find themselves having to be the link to patients' families. How do we help them cope?
Sure. So as I answer this question, I'd like to provide just a little background to what this behavioral problem, health problem is. So, every major disaster is followed by a behavioral health crisis. And what we're trying to do right now is to anticipate and to be able to effectively deal with this ongoing but also growing, behavioral health crisis. And the psychological response to a major trauma, to a major physical disaster, the psychological responses, have a certain predictable pattern. So, the first phase when we respond to a crisis like this is, what I would call the anticipation, the preparation, and then dealing with the immediate, trauma. And, so people then have certain needs, psychological needs that we're trying to help them with. And, I would say that this is probably the phase we are in right now. So what are those needs? People need to get a better sense of what's happening to them. They need to put things in better perspective. They have a lot of questions, both about their physical well-being and safety and psychological well-being and safety, et cetera. So what we have done at it started 6 to 8 weeks ago, we have put together a program to address some of these needs. The first phase of this program, a wellness program, I call it, was to offer half-hour sessions to anybody on the faculty or among the residents or on our staff or nursing staff to be able to call in and have either a phone conversation or a video meeting with one of our faculty, to really answer some of these questions and provide support. So this has been going on for the last 6 weeks, and a number of people from these various groups have been calling in and have been getting the support that they needed. Now, the second phase that started about 2-3 weeks ago has been to provide various groups with the kind of education on certain topics that we thought were very relevant. So, the groups that we are providing this are faculty, residents, staff, and nursing. We have created these groups, and we have experts, both from the Department of Psychology and the Department of Psychiatry, that offer specific education on topics such as how to deal with grief, how to deal with anxiety, depression, mindfulness, and how to deal with families and children during this COVID-19. So this is how we have started to address some of the immediate needs that our workforce has.
Dr. Savinow, thank you. Dr. Coffey, we just had this sent in from someone who's watching us. And the question goes like this. I am the caregiver of my mother that's 90 years old. She lives at home, she's healthy, but in the past few weeks, she's become very emotional for any little thing, like helping her with her meal or assisting her with a shower, which are things that I've always done in the past, in fact, before the virus. So my question is, how can I help her so she can get back to the way she was before, a strong woman and a happy person?
Tony, for that question. I'm a child psychiatrist by training, but there's a lot of similarities between geriatric psychiatry and child psychiatry. So I think one of the first orders of business would be to make sure that her mother has not been exposed to COVID and does not have it. In the elderly, COVID can present in different ways, not the classic shortness of breath, fever, and cough. So that would be one thing I would think about. Secondly, as we would advise parents of their children, it's important to provide a basic understanding of what's going on right now, but to not overburden vulnerable people with too much information. So to be straightforward, to give some information, to be kind, to be thoughtful, to be careful, to be sure you have enough time to communicate. All of those things I think are important, whether you're dealing with an elderly person or not. And it may be that her mother is dealing with being isolated from the rest of her family, being excluded from visits to family and loved ones. So reassurance and staying in touch and connecting in whatever way you can is very important, whether it's a child or an elderly person.
Dr. Coffey, thank you. Dr. Koffler, we just received this question as well for you. What types of supplements do you recommend for people with compromised immune systems?
Okay, so this has been looked at now by a few of us and some other universities, and we've all sort of put out a consensus on this. First and foremost probably is vitamin D3, and making sure that that level of vitamin D is at least at 50 or better. So vitamin D plays a very key role in the way your immune system knows to respond to invading marauders. So you want to make sure your D level is nice and high. And even though we live in South Florida and we should all be making plenty of D, I check these levels consistently and find them low. So to us, anything lower than 50 is probably too low at this time. Vitamin A is also vitamin A, zinc, and D, 3 critical nutrients for appropriate immune response. Another one that I like is quercetin. Quercetin is a bioflavonoid. That is, it's a pigment or a nutrient that comes out of particularly fruits and vegetables. Very high in apples, goji berries, capers, onions, kale, and you can also take it as a supplement, but it's great to have those foods in your diet. And we're also recommending elderberry. Elderberry has been studied in several different viruses, including MERS and SARS, and has been shown to be effective, as well as melatonin. Melatonin also is protective against damage done to the lungs. So especially if patients have an issue with sleep, we like to use melatonin in the setting of COVID as well.
Very good, Dr. Koffler, thank you. And Dr. Savinow, again, another one just sent in from one of our participants. I notice I am developing obsessive compulsive behaviors, such as washing my hands and cleaning surfaces all the time. What can I do?
Well, it's obsessive behaviors have been, part of the under the umbrella of anxiety disorders and anxiety symptoms, right? So, a lot of us have experienced a lot of anxiety, and that takes different forms. I think dealing with anxiety is once we recognize it, once we accept that it is something that we go through, that is normal to experience, etc., using as much useful scientific information to deal with the anxiety that we feel, leads to hopefully some loosening of these rigid obsessions or compulsions that we deal. I mean, these are defensive mechanisms that allow us to deal with feeling overwhelmed and feeling that overwhelmed by the unknown, etc. So I think information, sharing with others, letting others help us in our attempts to do the right thing, can help.
Dr. Savinow, thank you. Dr. Coffey, given your experience in dealing with children and adolescents, how do we speak to our children about why their world has changed so drastically?
That's a very important question, Tony. And I think first and foremost, we need to speak with our children about this and have a kind and thoughtful conversation about it. Children are worried. They've suddenly been cut off from their friends, from their classroom in school, from their teachers. And so just grounding them in some basic information and providing some, I'd say, cautious hopefulness about reassuring them. We know that it's very less likely to occur in children. And so giving them some basic reassurance is helpful. Another important principle in talking to our children is to answer questions on a need-to-know basis. So in other words, tell them a little bit about why they have to wear a mask or why they're not going to school, reassure them that they can connect with their loved ones and their friends remotely, but don't feel you have to give them a lot of additional information that they haven't asked about, but be kind and careful and thoughtful about making sure you answer all the questions that a child may have.
Well, Dr. Coffey, we're going to keep you here because we just had a question sent in that deals exactly with what you were talking about. And it says this: my 13-year-old daughter is having a hard time not seeing her friends. She's been very patient up until now. She's planning to get together with her friends, but it'll be hard on me to say no to her. Do you have any tips?
Yes, that is so important. And I get this question day in and day out when I'm seeing my patients and their parents. It is very important for children to keep their connections. And a 13-year-old, when developmentally kids are forming strong relationships, they're doing things together, activities in groups, it's very important to maintain connection. And so insofar as you can connect through FaceTime, through Zoom kinds of meetings, through other remote platforms, we encourage kids to have play dates online, essentially. The other interesting thing about the pandemic is that parents are now spending more time day after day with their children, which can be a blessing or not, depending upon the family situation. Parents are also acting as teachers now too. So oftentimes kids just want to get away from that and say, let me see my friends, and especially a teenager. So being able to provide opportunities for kids to connect. You can go outside and do social distancing if the child can keep to those kinds of rules and principles. Parents need to help with that. But it's important to stay connected for sure.
Dr. Coffey, thank you. So true, so true. Dr. Koffler, we've heard about the freshman 15, but now we're hearing about the COVID-15. So what are some of the key tips to maintaining a good diet during this quarantine?
Right, so it goes without saying that food is really not an ideal stress mitigating strategy. We commonly default to that, but it really is not an effective strategy. So, most people who are successful at this plan. So they have well stocked in their home the kinds of foods that are supporting their health goals. And they don't shop or order those foods that undermine them. And they especially don't shop or order when they're hungry. So those are some basic principles to follow. But really, it's helpful if the whole family is involved. It's helpful if everyone in the house is on board. And small changes make a big difference. So if you know you're vulnerable at the end of the day, which is what we typically see, when people are tired, that's when they tend to reach for the sweets or the chips or something carby. Planning your day so that time where you would usually reach for something that's not going to work for you. So maybe having a late afternoon snack that is good for you so you're not as hungry, or planning a walk while someone's making dinner, or intervening before you have a chance to reach for things that are problematic. And then the other thing is at night after dinner. Many people end their dinner and then continue to eat until bedtime. So dinner gets prolonged. We do know that our patients tell us all the time that when they simply cut out eating after dinner, they sleep better, they have a more restorative sleep the next day, their energy is better, brain fog improves. So the benefits that we see by just making a decision when you're done eating dinner, kitchen is closed, redirect your attention, people can often do really, really well. But at the end of the day, this is a decision that one has to make. And not everybody is ready to make it right now, and not everybody stays consistent with it 7 days a week. So we tell people the 80-20 rule. If you can get it 80% right, if you can get your diet to sustain a good nourishing diet that sustains you well, 80% right, we let go of the 20%.
Dr. Koffler, that's just great, great advice. I'm going to have to make a sign, though, that says kitchen closed. Dr. Savinow, we hear this over and over again. What will the impact of missing some of life's milestones be? For example, some people have not been able to be with their loved ones in the hospital or even attend their family member's funeral. Countless young people have been deprived of the ritual of graduation from high school or college. What do we know about the long-term impact of missing these ceremonies?
Sure. No, and this is a good question because many of us will miss a number of rituals and a number of significant events. I think a lot of this is based on the concept of resilience. And, you know, how do we deal, how do we cope, and how do we come out at the other end, you know, as unscathed as possible. So if you think, you know, the research that's been done on resilience, you know, shows that it's really the importance of what we call the 3 C's, you know, which it's control, it's connectedness and coherence. So those are 3 concepts that are very important to how resilient we are, how we build resilience. And, you know, it applies to answering this question because, so for instance, you know, we're missing an important milestone celebration in our child's or, you know, our loved one's life. Well, one way to deal with it is to take as much, to make as much meaning out of that event. So, and that's what I mean by coherence. You know, we all try to make sense of what's going on, and we create narratives to explain what's happening in our lives. And how we think about these events, how we build that narrative is very important. So somebody can look at missing an important event and say, I'm a victim, I feel lost, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, there is, you know, it's never gonna happen again, etc. That's one way to look at it that will lead to certain responses. But you can create a different narrative, which is, we're gonna miss this important event, but we will celebrate it later. So there was another chance. And we're gonna look forward to that. And we're gonna build on something that's positive and something that's hopeful. And that can make a huge difference in how we're gonna be able to tolerate, you know, the grief of missing these events, but look forward to something in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Savinow. Dr. Koffler, here's one for you that was just sent in. I've gained about 15 pounds since being quarantined for the past 62 days. We joke about it and call it the quarantine 15. However, is this something I should just accept for the time being, or is it important to get back on a rigorous diet?
I know what you want to hear, but I'm going to tell you what I would tell you if you were sitting in front of me. So when we gain weight, weight isn't just, you know, perhaps unsightly to us. It is an inflammatory organ. It secretes inflammatory cytokines. And one of the main things that we're trying to do to protect our patients is to minimize inflammation wherever that might be in a person. By doing so, you make your immune system much more appropriately reactive when it does encounter an organism like this virus. So, okay, so I would say to this individual, the party is over, and it's about, and you know, so what steps can you start with tomorrow to bring you back to the health that you were prior to COVID? And again, remember what I said, you know, be generous and kind and compassionate with yourself, because the world is a bit upside down. But we can all do a little bit better than we've done, and, you know, start with small steps. But my feeling is, yes, now is the time, actually, now is the time to take your health more seriously and develop those habits that will sustain you past this pandemic, shore you up for potentially another pandemic, but certainly help protect you from heart disease, dementia, diabetes, and all the other diseases that we see as often as we age. So it's not just about this virus, it's really about your health overall, because the same health habits protect you from a serious infection and protect you from the diseases as we age.
Dr. Koffler, I'd like to follow up with that. Besides washing your hands, can you discuss inflammatory disease and how we can keep our children safe?
So I'm not sure which inflammatory diseases. So that I probably have to have a little bit more clarity on specifics. Don't underestimate hand washing. I mean, the virus is made up of a very simple fat membrane, and we all know that soap breaks down fat, because when we wash our pans, when we wash our skillet, we're using simple dishwashing soap, and it eradicates the fat that was in the pan. So that's very, very helpful. In terms of other inflammatory, so if somebody has, let's say, an autoimmune disease, we're actually not seeing as many COVID cases among patients with autoimmune disease. We don't know why, but that's rather reassuring. I think I'd have to know more specifics about that particular person's question in order to answer it appropriately.
Dr. Koffler, thank you. Dr. Savinow, we just had this sent in. What can we do to curb online panic buying as a stress reliever?
Well, I think one of the principles, I'm going to start with that. One of the principles that I think we all need to know about and pay attention to is that the best kind of coping is what's called, it's ABC, acceptance-based coping. So we're all going to experience a number of feelings and a number of uncomfortable, emotions. So I think the first step is to accept that, because I think a lot of us are trying to distract ourselves, or trying to find things that will make us feel better. And, whether it's buying, whether it's doing, other, watching, interminable news reports, et cetera, to kind of distract us from what we're really feeling inside. So I think the first step is to accept, yes, I'm feeling anxious. Yes, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling frustrated, whatever it is that we're feeling at that moment. Because in that process of accepting that, it allows us to deal with the feeling differently and respond to the feeling differently. There is a saying in psychiatry, we don't control what we feel, but we do control what we do with our feeling. So I guess that's my kind of long answer to this. I think understanding what we're going through psychologically is really the first step towards curbing unhealthy behaviors.
Dr. Savinow, thank you. Dr. Coffey, this one sent in just now as well. How do you deal with nighttime fears, like nightmares, causing lack of sleep and depression?
Yes, that's a very important question. This is particularly relevant to children who may, just as a normal developmental phenomenon in their very young years, have bad dreams or nightmares. I think it's helpful to keep a daily ritual or a nighttime ritual within the family if that's possible. Especially for children, it might be important for the parent to say some soothing words before the child goes to sleep, adhere to the usual rituals, whether it's a bedtime story or a game with a sibling or something like that. So we know, and Dr. Koffler, I think, emphasized this, that it's so important for one's general health to have restorative sleep. And children are particularly prone to having sleep disrupted by worries or anxiety. So anything that you could do to keep the normal routines going, ease that transition from wakefulness to sleep, which is a time of emotional and psychological separation that can be difficult for children. All that can be done to keep those kinds of transitions healthy and safe would be important for sleep. An occasional nightmare, an occasional bad dream, totally expected and not necessarily a problem. If they become recurrent or regular, that's the time when we begin to be more concerned.
Dr. Koffler, thank you so much. Dr. Coffey, thank you so much. Pardon me. Dr. Koffler, I am going to ask you this question that was just sent in. And you sort of touched on this when you mentioned melatonin as a supplement a little bit earlier. But here's the question. If anxiety does not let me sleep, is it okay to take a sleeping medicine?
So, you know, I think one thing to remember is that how we prepare for sleep is really part of sleep. So, you know, what I hear about are, you know, as was mentioned, some of the dramas that people watch, binge watch even before going to bed or listening to the news. These are not things you want to be doing prior to bedtime. In fact, I tell my patients, if you're going to watch TV, which I want you to think about, it can only be comedy. So, you know, the state of being that is invoked when you laugh is very healing. So that I'm fine with. But creating an evening that allows you to succumb to sleep. So, you know, not doing your taxes or not doing those things that create tension in you leading up to sleep is really important. There are so many options for what you can do to help you sleep. I do like, as I mentioned, melatonin, although I do want to mention a caveat, it does create very vivid dreams. So for some people, that's a wonderful adventure, and for others, that's not so much fun. So it's a very individual thing. There are teas like chamomile tea that is relaxing and works plenty well for many of my patients. There are many other supplements like L-theanine and lemon balm and kava and valerian and passion flower, and the list goes on and on and on of the things that you can try. And what will work for you may not work for someone else. So it's worth giving some of those a try, including CBD oil, which you can get effective companies for CBD oil that does very well for a lot of patients. Making sure that you exercise regularly. We know that exercisers generally are better sleepers, and doing it early in the day, not in the evening, because that may disrupt sleep. Alcohol will disrupt sleep. In so many of my patients who did not realize that for many of them, waking up at 3 a.m. went away when they stopped having a glass of wine because of the impact on blood sugar. So that's something to bear in mind. And then sugar before bed also tends to cause awakenings during the night. So addressing that. But I would hold off on the pharmaceuticals and try some of the natural remedies first, because pharmaceuticals don't tend to engender a deep sleep. In fact, the only thing that we know of that's accessible is really melatonin that helps you attain deeper stages of sleep. Other medications that we often prescribe give more of a it will get people to sleep, but they tend to be in lighter stages. And so it's not as restorative.
Dr. Koffler, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Dr. Coffey, another one just sent in. Rather lengthy question, but one I think that we really need to deal with. How do you expect people to manage social interaction when we start to reopen? I've seen a group of people, some friends involved, being overly concerned now and policing others that are just taking the reasonable precautions to avoid the spread of the virus, which is already bringing conflict in those friendships. How should I address this conflict positively?
Yes, I think that's a complicated question, as you indicated. First of all, as you know, we have to follow the CDC guidelines and our state guidelines as our governor begins to open up our state gradually and I think thoughtfully in terms of differences between South Florida and Northern Florida. So we have to really abide by those rules. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to pay attention to the rules and not break them, but insofar as helping people adjust to reopening and reactivating our businesses, it's important to follow the rules and take things step by step. We have to keep in mind that there's a need to get our lives going again on the one hand, a strong need on the other hand to keep safe and keep healthy. So that is going to mean, I think, for the immediate future, if not a much longer term future, social distancing or physical distancing, as you might say, facial coverings, reducing numbers of people in small and crowded places, keeping our gatherings to a small number. And I think we have to work with our patients and our friends and colleagues to how can we slowly, carefully, step by step resume our lives while keeping these things in mind. Certainly, UHealth has been very involved in a very orderly progression from where we were a week ago, a month ago, to where we're going in July and August. So I think we have to have a bigger picture in mind and to try to be kind to one another and kind to ourselves. I've seen people fighting, and attacking others when they aren't wearing their mask. That's not going to help anyone or anything. So being careful, being thoughtful, and slowly reactivating, I think, is the best guideline.
Thank you so much. And we love all these questions that you're sending in. Here's another, Dr. Savinow, this one's for you. What advice do you have for someone who lives alone, has no family or spouse, and is now working at home and isolated for days on end?
Well, remember the 3 C's I was talking about. Connectedness is one of the three, and it's essential to stay engaged in any way that's available. So, lots of people now live alone. Their families are far away, their friends are far away, et cetera, et cetera. So, what we try to do is to have some routines, to connect with others. So, I know people who, have regular phone calls every day with friends or family. I know people who have engaged in some online classes, for instance, where other people are present and they can share and or join some group, on so any kind of this activity is helpful, and to not shy away and not feel embarrassed by this need to connect, because that is one of really the essential components of being human.
Dr. Savinow, thank you. Dr. Koffler, this question just came in as well. My daughter is 13. Can she take melatonin?
She can. I would have her take a low dose. So I'd probably start her off at 0.5 milligram and see how she does. Realize too that you create a great deal of melatonin if you get first morning sunlight. So if you're out for about 20 minutes first thing in the morning with direct sunlight, you're going to produce a lot more melatonin that you'll later secrete. So that's one natural way of increasing melatonin. but yes, she can take it and then just slightly increase the dose until she's able to sleep. Bearing in mind, as I said, it can produce vivid dreams.
Dr. Kofler, thank you. Dr. Coffey, this one just sent in as well. The quarantine hit about 2 weeks after I began a divorce. Since then, my 7-year-old has become obsessed with the concept of death and has sad moments where he becomes focused on COVID-19 and the idea of us dying. They tend to only arise strongly when he's with my ex. What can I do to help him through this and help minimize his anxiety when he's so isolated from his friends and the rest of his family?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough situation, for sure. Children who are 7 are just beginning to think in a kind of concrete way, and they may be hearing things about death and dying if they're exposed to the media or the news. It's also possible in this little 7-year-old that because the parents have just decided to get divorced or separated, that it intensifies worries about loss. And for a child who's just at that age beginning to come to terms with what is death, it's very hard for a 7-year-old to conceptualize that. It magnifies the anxiety and the fear. So it's most important for the parent to reassure the child that it's very, very rare for anybody to die from this illness. It happens, but if you look at percentages, it's very low. That mom and dad love the child very much, and even though they're going to be separated or divorcing, that they will continue to love the child and be with him and do whatever they need to do to help the child be safe. But I think in this context of loss, of a very frightening loss, even if we didn't have COVID going on, it's magnified the anxiety about COVID. So this is a good situation in which careful reassurance, not unrealistic reassurance, that yes, people do get sick, but we have treatments and so forth, will be best for the child, and making sure that the child maintains contact, not just with the parent who he's not living with perhaps, or she, but also with siblings and with extended family at a time like this. This is where the strength of the family can really provide support for a child whose parents are separated.
Again, just great advice, Dr. Coffey. Dr. Savanow, here's another one that just sent in. How can I improve my focus? Sometimes I start a project in one room, then I go into another room and start something else, and then I remember the first project. I find it hard to finish things.
Well, again, I think in this time of being home and working from home, and you know, there's such a change for all of us that, you know, we lose track of the structure that we used to have that came somewhat naturally. You go to work at a certain time, you do certain things, interact with certain people, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, I mean, I've been working from home now for 6-8 weeks, and I have to create my own structure. When do I start working? When do I stop? When do I start this project? When do I start another project? When do I take this call, etc.? When do I stop working? That's another important concept that a lot of people forget about, you know, and actually, for better or worse, I was reading some articles that said that productivity has gone up like 3 hours a day for a lot of people, because, you know, we don't stop as we used to. But that can be stressing in the long run, and it can cause, you know, a burnout. So we need to pay attention to this, and like I said, we need to create a structure and try to stick with it. And that includes meals, that includes interacting with family, that includes work structure, etc. And that would help us stay more focused if we do that.
Dr. Savanow, stay there, because I have another one for you. I've seen reports that there have been higher rates of suicide during this pandemic. How can we help people who might be at risk during this time?
Sure. Well, the rate of suicide in our country is somewhere around 45,000, 50,000 people a year, at least that we know of. And, you know, it's associated with depression, with other psychiatric illnesses, with substance abuse, but also associated with a number of environmental, economic issues. And one thing that, you know, our studies are beginning to show us is that, you know, because of the economic downturn and the high rate of unemployment, suicide rates tend to go up, you know, and I read somewhere that, you know, for each 1% increase in unemployment, there is an extra 1,000 or suicide number. Now, so in terms of what to do, well, I think watching and monitoring the person, you know, is this person somebody who has suffered from depression or from a psychotic disorder? Is this person turning to alcohol or other substances to cope with the loneliness and isolation? Is the
Dr. Savinow, we seem to be having a little bit of a technical problem with your video feed and your audio feed. So let me go talk to Dr. Coffey. Is it unhealthy not to mind this time of isolation and to feel peaceful?
That's an interesting question. I think I want to just emphasize that each individual is going to respond to this crisis in their own unique way. So if somebody, for example, has a lot of social anxiety and is being able to do what they usually do at home, stay connected to the degree that they want to, it's fine if they don't really experience stress in the way that other people would or will. So I think we have to understand each individual's style of coping and personality and environment and so forth to really understand reacting in a different way. It's most important as we reach out to our friends and family and loved ones to not be judgmental. We each react differently. I have a patient I was seeing who has a lot of anxiety, particularly about germs and contamination and being separated from her parents. She's 13. And she said, well, gee, I don't mind homeschool because I'm less worried not having to go out right now. I'm fine with it. So everybody reacts in their own way. I think we have to be careful to, you know, not assume anything about our colleagues and friends and family, and just listen and understand how they're feeling.
Dr. Coffey, I'm going to come right back to you here. I know some people watch the news all day long. Dr. Savinow talked about it a second ago. Is it important to not spend too much time on watching the news about COVID-19?
The answer is yes. It's important to limit the amount of exposure to the media, not just broadcast news, but also reading about it, the newspaper, feeds that you get on your phone. It's like a sort of toxic part of the environment right now. Yes, it's helpful to have information, to know what's going on and to know of new developments, but it's not helpful to have too much information right now. So I caution all the patients that I see, both parents, kids, adults, limit the amount of exposure. Treat yourself to one media exposure per day, maybe once in the morning and once at night, and then let it go.
Do you notice any difference in your practice and how men and women are dealing with this isolation, Dr. Coffey?
Well, again, I think it depends on the individual. I think women often tend to have a very strong network of friends as part of their lives, just the kind of typical thing, whereas men have their spouses and may not have as large a network. So I think it's important to recognize that there are differences in the way people respond, and to sort of accept people where they are. I think we do know so far that COVID tends to impact men or affect men more than women. We don't know whether that's an immune system response or something else, but that may have an impact on how people deal with the emotional aspects of COVID in terms of, gee, I'm a guy, do I have to really worry about this a lot more than my wife does?
Dr. Coffey, we're going to give you the last question here. Given that our children are with us now 24 hours a day, how can we manage their separation anxiety when we all go back to work or go back to school? And what should and shouldn't we do?
It's a great question. I think the best answer to that, and the short one, is to prepare your child or your adolescent to go back to school. You can rehearse what it's going to be like. You can assemble all the belongings the child will need. You could discuss it in advance, but I think preparation is always the best psychological approach for transitions.
And as we close the town hall tonight, I would like to ask Dr. Coffey your final thoughts.
Thank you, Tony, for moderating, and our thanks to everyone who participated, particularly the wonderful questions that were sent in. The support and generosity of our Board of Trustees, volunteers, and loyal donors is helping us through this crisis. You are all playing a crucial role in this historic event, and I could not be prouder of the way the Canes community has come together in this important fight. Our thanks to you and your families for the sacrifices you are making by staying home and practicing physical distancing to help reduce the spread of this disease and ultimately the burden on our healthcare workforce. Please stay safe, continue to look out for one another, and continue to reach out to your healthcare providers with any concerns. We will be there, and we will get through this together. Thank you.
And Dr. Coffey, how can people get help?
This is an important time to look to the resources. We have resources on our website, our wellness website at UM. And there are other resources online, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Hotline. We can make sure that people have that information to reach out. Be sure and reach out to us if you need some help.
Dr. Coffey, thank you. And thank you all for participating in tonight's In the Know Town Hall. I think you will all agree with me what a wonderful and informative hour this has been. All of the doctors have been so forthcoming with great and useful advice that we can use now. We know at times this is a difficult and very sensitive subject to talk about. That's why we are so thankful for all of our amazing doctors, as you saw tonight, and for all of your questions tonight. Thank you so much for that. They were just coming in one after another. Now, as a reminder, a full recording of this program will be posted online. You can look for that link in your email tomorrow. And it'll also include resources for you or anyone you love to reach out if they're struggling with some of this. And if you would like to support UHealth's response to COVID-19, visit uhealthemergencyrelief.com. We truly love spending this past hour with you. And again, we are so thankful and so grateful for all of our great doctors for putting themselves out on the front line each and every day. I'm sure you will agree again. This is an amazing group of individuals. From all of us here at the University of Miami and UHealth, you know what we say, it's all about the you. We wish you and your family good health. Be safe. Good night, everyone.